They told us it would smell like a slaughterhouse. They were wrong. It was worse. I'm 98 years old now, and I can still smell Antietam. 75 years haven't washed it away. Nothing will. September 17th, 1862. They called it the bloodiest day in American history. 23,000 casualties in 12 hours. But those are just numbers. Numbers don't scream. Numbers don't beg for their mothers. Numbers don't grab your skirt with hands that are missing fingers and plead with you to lie to them, to tell them they're going to be fine when you both know they're not. I was Sarah Catherine Barlow then, 23 years old, a proper young woman from Philadelphia who'd been raised to pour tea and play piano. I wasn't supposed to be kneeling in blood-soaked hay, holding the hand of a dying boy from Ohio while he whispered his sweetheart's name. But my brother Thomas died alone at Bull Run, 19 years old, died of infection from a leg wound, screaming for our mother for 3 days. No one there to comfort him, no one to hold his hand. When I heard that from his sergeant, something broke inside me, or maybe something finally made sense. If boys were going to die far from home, someone should be there. I volunteered with the Sanitary Commission in early 1862. My mother called it unseemly. My father threatened to disown me, but I'd already lost Thomas. What else could they take? They gave us 3 weeks of training, how to change bandages, how to administer morphine when there was morphine, how to write letters for men whose hands wouldn't work anymore, how to clean wounds, how to comfort the dying. They didn't tell us how many dying there would be. Couldn't have, really. Some things are beyond words. By September, I'd been working in Washington hospitals for 8 months. I'd seen amputations, infections, men wasting away from dysentery and typhoid. I thought I'd seen the worst of war. Then they asked for volunteers to go to the field hospitals at Antietam. The battle had been massive, they said. Casualties were overwhelming the surgeons. They needed help, needed it desperately. I raised my hand, thought I was ready, thought 8 months in the hospitals had prepared me. I was a fool. We arrived at Sharpsburg on September 18th, the day after the battle. The wagon ride from Frederick took 6 hours, and we could hear the screaming long before we could see the field hospitals. The smell hit us first, powder smoke still hanging in the air, mixing with something worse, blood, lots of it, but also torn flesh, exposed intestines, gangrene already setting in, and underneath it all, human waste. Men who'd lost control of their bodies in terror or death. It was a smell that coated your throat, got into your hair, your clothes, your lungs. One of the other nurses, Mary Hendricks from Boston, vomited right there in the wagon. The driver didn't even slow down. The first field hospital was set up in a church. Dunker Church, they called it. A small white building that had been caught in the crossfire. The walls were pockmarked with bullet holes. Some of the windows were blown out entirely. Inside was hell. They'd laid the wounded on the floors, the pews, anywhere there was space. There wasn't enough space. Men were lying shoulder to shoulder, some on top of others. The floorboards were sticky with blood, so much blood it pooled in the corners. The pews had been shoved aside to make room for surgery tables. 3 of them. 3 surgeons working as fast as they could, their aprons soaked red, their saws moving through bone with sounds I can still hear. A pile in the corner. Arms. Legs. A mountain of severed limbs just piled there, like cordwood. Later I watched a soldier, couldn't have been more than 16, searching through that pile, looking for his arm. He wanted his arm back, had his mother's ring on one of the fingers. We never found it. Dr. Letterman, he was in charge of the medical corps, saw us standing there frozen. "Don't just stand there, girls," he said, not unkindly, but firm. "Start with water. They need water. Then come find me for assignments." Water. Such a simple thing. I picked up a bucket and a ladle and moved toward the first man. He'd been shot through the face. His jaw was gone, just gone. But his eyes were open and pleading, and he was trying to make sounds through what was left of his throat. I held the ladle to what remained of his mouth. The water just ran out through the hole in his face, mixing with blood, dripping onto his chest. He tried to thank me anyway, tried to form words that would never come again. That was the first minute. I had days ahead of me. The surgeons worked in shifts, but there were never enough of them. Never enough morphine, never enough chloroform, never enough bandages, never enough of anything except wounded men and screaming. They had a system, triage they called it. You'd walk through and assess who could be saved, who needed immediate surgery, who would die regardless. That last group got moved to a separate area, the dying corner. Someone would sit with them if possible, hold their hands, write final letters. But usually there wasn't time. Usually they died alone, calling for mothers and wives who were hundreds of miles away. I learned to spot the belly wounds quickly. If a man was shot through the abdomen, he was done. Could take hours, even days. But the outcome was certain. Peritonitis would set in. I watched strong men scream themselves hoarse as their insides rotted. We'd give them laudanum if we had it, whiskey if we didn't, but mostly we just had words. Lies, really. You're going to be fine. The doctor will see you soon. Just hold on. Private James Sullivan from New York, shot through the stomach at the cornfield. He was 19 years old and he died over the course of 2 days, fully conscious for most of it. He knew he was dying, kept apologizing to me, apologizing for bleeding on my dress, for taking up space, for dying. I held his hand and lied to him until the end. The amputations were constant. The surgeons could take off a limb in under 10 minutes if they had to. I assisted in dozens. You'd hold the man down, or try to when the chloroform ran out. You'd hand the surgeon his tools, saw, knife, needle and silk thread for stitching the flaps of skin. You'd watch the limb come off, still twitching sometimes, and try not to think about what that meant for a farmer's son who'd never work his fields again. A Confederate soldier they brought the wounded from both sides to the hospitals had taken a Minié ball through his thigh. The bone was shattered. Infection was already setting in, black lines spreading up toward his hip. Dr. Slocum decided to amputate. We were out of chloroform, out of morphine. All we had was whiskey and a leather strap to bite down on. I had to hold that boy's shoulders while they sawed off his leg. He was screaming and thrashing and begging God to let him die. I can still feel his fingers digging into my arms. Still hear the sound the saw made going through bone. His name was William Price. He was 17, from Georgia. He survived the surgery but died 3 days later from shock and blood loss. Before he died, he asked me to write to his mother. Tell her he'd been brave. Tell her he hadn't cried. I wrote the letter. I lied. What else could I do? The worst part wasn't the blood or the screaming or the sawing. The worst part was getting used to it. By the second day, I could eat my dinner sitting 10 feet from a surgery table, could step over bodies in the hallway without flinching, could hear a man scream and not even turn my head because I was already helping someone else. I became numb to it, had to. The alternative was going mad. The days blurred together, day 3, day 4, day 5. The wounded kept coming even after the battle ended. Men who'd crawled into ditches or woods, too hurt to move, finally found by burial parties. By then, infection had usually set in. Gangrene. You could smell it before you saw it. Sweet and rotten, like spoiled meat left in the sun. We amputated limbs that were already dead, black and putrid. Sometimes maggots had gotten into the wounds. The surgeons said that was actually helpful. The maggots ate the dead tissue, kept infection from spreading. Didn't make it any less horrifying to see. I worked 18 to 20 hours a day. Slept on the floor when I could, usually just for an hour or two before someone needed me. My dress was so stiff with dried blood it could almost stand up on its own. My hands were cracked and raw from constantly washing them. What little water we had, I tried to keep clean, tried to be sanitary. But it was impossible. Everything was covered in blood and filth. Mary Hendricks, the nurse from Boston who'd gotten sick on the ride over, she left after 4 days. Just walked away. Said she couldn't take it anymore. I didn't blame her. Part of me wanted to do the same, but I kept thinking about Thomas, about him dying alone, about all these boys dying alone. So I stayed. There were moments of strange kindness in all the horror. A Union soldier sharing his tobacco with a Confederate in the bed next to him, both of them missing legs, both of them knowing they'd probably never walk again, and they're lying there talking about their farms back home like they were old friends. I watched a surgeon, Dr. Harris, from Pennsylvania, work for 36 hours straight, didn't sleep, barely ate, just kept cutting, sawing, stitching. When he finally stopped, he walked outside and vomited. Then he sat down on the church steps and cried, just sat there and sobbed like a child. I sat down next to him, didn't say anything. What was there to say? After a few minutes, he wiped his eyes, stood up, and went back inside. There were more men to save, always more men. By the end of the first week, we'd treated over 2,000 wounded. Hundreds died. The ones who survived, well, survived is a generous word. Most went home missing limbs, missing eyes, missing pieces of themselves they'd never get back. I was starting to realize I'd never get back the pieces I was losing either. It was on the 8th day when I finally broke. His name was Daniel Cooper, 20 years old, from Ohio, shot through both legs at Burnside Bridge. We'd amputated the right leg 3 days earlier. The left one had seemed salvageable, but infection set in anyway. Dr. Slocum wanted to take the second leg. Daniel begged us not to. Please, he kept saying, please don't take the other one. Please. I can't go home like that. I can't. We took it anyway. Had to. The alternative was watching him die of blood poisoning. He survived the surgery, woke up hours later and looked down at where his legs used to be, both of them gone, just stumps wrapped in blood-soaked bandages. He didn't scream, didn't cry, just stared at the empty space where his legs should have been. Then he looked at me. Why? He asked. Just that one word. Why? I didn't have an answer, didn't have any words at all. That night, I found Daniel in the dying corner. He'd managed to crawl there somehow, pulling himself across the floor with just his arms. Found a piece of broken glass, probably from one of the blown-out windows, cut his own throat before anyone could stop him. He bled out on the floor while I held pressure on the wound, knowing it was pointless, knowing he'd made his choice. His eyes stayed open the whole time, and they looked relieved, like he was finally free. I sat there with his blood on my hands. Literal blood, not metaphorical, and something inside me just shattered. I started shaking, couldn't stop. My hands were trembling so badly I couldn't grip anything. I tried to stand up and my legs wouldn't work, just collapsed back down onto the floor next to Daniel's body. I must have made some kind of sound because Dr. Slocum found me there. He helped me outside, sat me down, gave me some water. You need to rest, he said. There are more wounded, I said. My voice sounded strange, flat, like it was coming from somewhere far away. There are always more wounded, he said, but you're no good to anyone if you fall apart. Too late. I'd already fallen apart. I just hadn't noticed until that moment. I took 2 hours to sleep. Then I went back inside. Because what else was there to do? The work didn't stop just because I was broken. I left Antietam after 2 weeks. They didn't need as many nurses by then. The seriously wounded had either died or been transported to proper hospitals. The field hospitals were closing down. Time to move on. I went back to the Washington hospitals, worked there until the war ended in 1865, saw thousands more wounded, more amputations, more deaths, more boys calling for their mothers, but nothing ever matched those 2 weeks at Antietam. That was where something fundamental changed in me. My parents wanted me to come home after the war, resume my old life, find a suitable husband, pretend the previous 4 years hadn't happened. I tried. God knows I tried. Lasted 3 months in Philadelphia before I couldn't stand it anymore. All those people going about their lives, complaining about trivial things, having no idea what had happened just a few miles away in places like Sharpsburg. I became a nurse permanently, worked in hospitals for the next 40 years, never married. My mother said it was because the war had made me unsuitable for marriage. She was right, though not in the way she meant. How could I sit in a parlor making small talk when I'd held dying boys in my arms? How could I care about tea parties and social calls when I knew what Daniel Cooper's eyes looked like when he died? I had nightmares for decades, still do sometimes. I'm 98 years old, and I still wake up smelling that smell, blood and gangrene and death. I still hear the sound of the surgical saw going through bone. I still see Private Sullivan apologizing for bleeding on my dress. Still see William Price begging me to lie to his mother. Still see Daniel Cooper's throat opening under that piece of broken glass. People thank me for my service, call me a hero. They have no idea. There were no heroes at Antietam, just people trying to survive, trying to save whoever they could, knowing it would never be enough. I saved some men. I'm sure of that. Held their hands, gave them water, changed their bandages, assisted in surgeries that allowed them to live. But I couldn't save Daniel Cooper. Couldn't save James Sullivan or William Price or hundreds of others whose names I don't even remember anymore because there were just too many. The young woman who volunteered in 1862, that proper Philadelphia girl who wanted to honor her brother's memory. She died at Antietam just as surely as the soldiers did. What came back was someone else, someone harder, someone who'd seen too much, someone who could never quite figure out how to live in a world that wasn't soaked in blood and screaming. They say the battle lasted 12 hours, 23,000 casualties in half a day. But for those of us who treated the wounded afterward, Antietam lasted weeks, months, years. It's still lasting. 75 years later, I'm still there in that church, still hearing the screams, still holding the hands of dying boys, still trying to save men who are already lost. I survived Antietam, but I never left it, and I never will.